Wow.
Eleanor,
Hi,
hey.
Mello.
So, how you doing? How
I'm
you
doing good. It's good to
Yeah,
see you.
yeah, no, it's good to see you too. And obviously you are repping the Bay because that's where you're from.
Ooh, ooh, ooh,
Ooh, Bay Area.
ooh.
Yeah, so I'm really excited. You are kicking off season 2
Oh
of
my gosh.
Data Yap. Yeah.
What a privilege.
Yeah,
Are you
and
sure about
you
this?
know, yeah, and it's like it's the beginning of the summer and also the last week of Asian American Heritage Month. So I think it's a good way to kick off this season and end this month with you because you are just phenomenal. So thank you for
Oh,
coming today.
thank you for having me. I love all that you're doing right now. And so just appreciate being here and just sharing space with you and everybody else.
Yeah, everybody else. But yeah, so Eleanor, I guess I'll tell you all how we met.
Yeah,
Basically, I was on Eleanor's master's thesis committee. Is that what you would call it? And you can
that thing.
tell them more about what that means. And so I was one of the people who was helping Eleanor finish her master's thesis in biology. And now we're here. And um, I'm so excited about talking to you because you're not just an educator, but you do a lot of so many cool things, especially, in terms of you're basically like a Filipino cultural steward, if you will. And if people don't know what that is, it's just someone who is like in practice of like Filipino culture, in terms of the arts, and because you do weaving, right? And also this thing called the eskrima, which is a martial arts.
Yeah.
But you know what? I'm boring everybody. I'm gonna let you talk about these things because you know more about it than I do.
Oh, thanks, Mello. Yeah, so yeah, I Mello's one of my trusted advisors, one of my core team of four that got me through academia. And a lot of that also relates back to some of the I guess like some of the things that I've been learning and practicing and hoping to, continue passing down through a lot of the I guess cultural stewardship and that kind of work that I mean, it's not really work, right? But it's just like what embody, right? Like as a pinay. And so Mello mentioned eskrima and weaving. So eskrima actually came first. It's like something that I didn't actually grow up with, but in my family, and when I think about family in diaspora, it's such a different definition or even an expansive definition of like what those kinds of bonds can mean when you're away from your homeland, when you don't have like a lot of blood relatives with you, when you got your peoples, right? And so really thinking about going beyond just being in community. um and so my ninang, so my godmother, who's been a big part of my life, her uncle actually is the person who's teaching my mom and I eskrima. And so we started about maybe 3 years ago, and it's really just like a family thing. It started off just to really help me maybe feel more in my body. It's just something I never really felt too comfortable with, like in my own body. And I was like, you know what? I've lived my life this long. I don't think I can keep going like this. And so it gives me a different awareness, but it's just taught me so much. And it being a cultural practice that was not only banned and forbidden for so long, but the fact that it's like a literal living form of our resistance and our resilience and storytelling, just in how it's so connected to the land and our people and our stories, from there, here, anywhere. And there's some interesting things about that of how that's played out, as many things go with neocolonialism and all of that. But it's taught me so much, and it's really changed not only how I move, but like literally move here. So it's been good. Yeah.
Wow. So Thank you for, talking about eskrima in a cultural context. I know what that is, but in case some people do not know what that is, but what exactly is that? Like, what does it involve?
Yeah. So eskrima is like as you kind of mentioned, mellow, a traditional martial art. And it's really about protection, about protecting yourself, about protecting family, about protecting community, protecting your people. And like most, I think martial arts, it involves like a certain readiness of like the mind, the body, and the spirit. So in that kind of a practice, it's really connected in that way. It's practiced all across the archipelago under different names and usually passed down by family. So that there's like certain lineages within that. So within Eskrima, you might even have people who do Kali or, and then there'll be different names through that and different practitioners. And so within Eskrima itself too, a lot of people talk about it as stick fighting. It's not stick fighting. It's really anything that goes into your hand, including your hand, is can be a weapon. And there's a narrative, I think, around martial arts and self-defense, and all of that about like violence. But really, this is a practice of protection and in that way counter violence. So if someone is making a situation inherently harmful or violent, right? It changes the context of like how I get to respond. And so it's really not about just like fighting anybody I want, right? This is like supposed to be last resort, right? If we can't talk it out, if we can't do all these different things, if there's really no other way, right? Then this is what I will do, right? So, um, but yeah, it teaches me so much more than about moving my body and feeling connected with it and certain movements, but really about a practice of how we come ready and stay ready. Yeah.
Wow. Wow, I love that. Like actually, I thought I knew about eskrima, but talking to you right now, I'm actually learning more about in terms of like because like I've seen it translated. It's like, oh, it's like stick fighting, because you have two sticks.
Yeah.
Usually, like when you see how it's depicted, it's
Yeah.
two people, each person is holding a stick and they're fighting with it. So I've seen it
Right.
that way, and also I've seen it be called Kali as well. But you're telling me
Yes.
actually Kali is just kind of like one of the sub lineages. Is that what you're saying?
It's like so there's Arnis, Eskrima, and Kali, right? And so you can sometimes the names are interchangeable and there's like a history around like which name came first. And Arnis and Eskrima do have like a Spanish influence to the name. And so that's why some people, really go back to Kali. But there's if you look across the archipelago where some of the terms are used, Arnis and Eskrima are mostly north and middle, like Luzon, Visayas. And then like towards more south is Kali. And you have like those different influences and it really shows up in the style. So it's so beautiful how different parts of different Filipino, right, cultures, different ethno-linguistic groups, different ethnic groups, right, different tribes, everything, a lot of that influence of like where they are in connection to the land is depicted in how the style is. Like my friends, they practice a style from the South, and they have movements where I was like, y'all fighting in cursive. I don't know what this is. Like, respectfully. But it's so beautiful because they're explaining how like the way that they may move is because like if you're on the boat, if you're on the water, right, you have to balance differently so that the way they move has more curves and more it's more about like the footwork and versus for me from from the north and practicing what my uncle's been teaching me, my energy is placed elsewhere and I have more of like a different stance, right? And so even like the way that we might move double stick, right? But it really is also a blade culture. So we have a blade culture. So traditionally it is blades that people use or the hands, but technically anything that you use, right? Anything goes.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, no, I've definitely heard that before. Like you can you can use anything as a weapon.
Yeah.
Uh,
Anything. Even this.
Yeah, especially this, right?
Right.
Especially this. And the guy who told me that actually, I was in the Bay Area. This was like, I don't know, maybe like 20 years ago,
Yeah.
21 years ago. So I was, definitely a
A
college
young
student.
mellow.
Yeah, little more, yeah,
Younger mellow. My
right.
bad. Let me put some
Yeah.
respect on that. My bad.
But actually, like, he was like a classmate, and
Yeah.
one time I saw him with this book, and it was about the balisong,
Yes.
the knife, the butterfly knife. It's
Butterfly
how,
knife.
yeah, and like I was just so mesmerized by it, and I had to borrow the book. Of
Yeah.
course, I didn't really learn by
Yeah.
myself because this is something you should learn in community, right? With
Right.
other people, especially it's a very dynamic kind of activity.
Right.
But yeah, but I remember him telling me that like, you can turn anything into a knife. Um, but anyway, like I think that is just incredible. I'm probably gonna have to sit in one of your classes when I'm in the Bay. And
Come by.
yeah, and I think also I'm like jumping topics here, but that is so cool that you know how to do this like defensive um activity. I don't know what to call it, techniques, right?
Yeah.
And then you also know how to weave,
Yeah.
which is
Yes.
so delicate. So it's kind of this, like, yeah, I'm a badass. And like, oh, I wouldn't say I'm delicate, but like it's a very delicate
Totally.
um, kind of activity. So can you tell me more about how you got started with weaving?
Yeah. Speaking of ancestral form, like there's so many. And so that's why I think it's so important for folks to really there's like a space for everybody, I think, in our cultures, even though how some of that comes out, especially in diaspora, really looks so binary. It's so interesting to me. And so I think that's also why it's been such a challenge for me to even, aside from like the time that, work and academia and all of that takes, from all of these things, they run on a different perspective of time. Um, and so that's something that's just been a clear lesson for me in all this. But anyways, yeah, back to weaving. Um, and I want to emphasize too, I'm still learning all this. Like I'm not an expert, right? But I think that even in our culture, like the practice of like when your teacher tells you you gotta do this, you gotta do it. When it's time for you, right? Even if you feel like you're not ready or not, like that's part of the practice, right? Sometimes you just get thrown in and we learn by doing. And it's like a really simple but really deep way of doing things. But yeah, so weaving, I kind of came to that a little bit later. I don't think I would have gotten into weaving the way that I have, had I not taken a break from work, had I not taken a break from academia, because of like the time and just being able to meet folks that are really well aligned in cultural values and all of that, but and really about cultural stewardship. So, I'm not just doing these things just to do them. But weaving is there's different types of weaving across the archipelago, and there thankfully are indigenous groups, particularly our indigenous women who are carrying that all the way through. And so a lot of that is with textiles. And so that's kind of how I got brought into weaving. So I had the opportunity to learn Kalinga backstrap weaving. So it's a traditional style backstrap weaving. So it has like a backstrap loom. So instead of like a full loom where you sit down and it has like all the I don't even know all the terms for those because it's not something that I do, and I'm also really new to weaving. But the backstrap bloom, you have like these different pieces, and I could go through all the pieces and whatnot at another time, right? But you can set it up pretty much anywhere, and you can go, and it's also something that's done in community. So it's really similar to eskrima. It's all of these things are meant to be done like together. But weaving teaches like a different thing. It's still using your whole body, right? My body is the loom in a way sometimes. Like my body is the one creating these things, just as like with Eskrima, I'm creating these movements or I'm creating space or things like that. And they're both connected actually because some of the movements in eskrima, which is also connected to dance, because that's how it was basically hidden, right? People kept the practice alive through dance. Sinawali means to weave. Sinawali is one of the movements that we do in eskrima, and so in some ways you're also weaving in like this sort of consciousness and into that practice you have to be present, but weaving is different like you're mentioning. There's a almost like a I don't know how to describe how it feels when I do it. Like you just really get locked in, and it's a different way to be embodied, like a different way to feel even more connected, or just it's relaxing. But there is a certain focus that you do have to have, but it's definitely not the same as a screama. Yeah.
Wow. Wow, that is amazing. So how did you hear about weaving at all? Is it like another family friend?
Yeah, so I mean, it's so funny this way, and this is something that I've been um so amazed by the last couple of months in my life where I mean in the last even the last 2 years in particular, I've just had so many like not so many like as in like 15 but like even like five core people and they're also like other indigenous folks that have just been coming up and um really being able to invite me in and graciously like show me and kind of show me some of their practices and um really we get to do some things together like culturally that help me bring me back to mine, and I think that's what it's about. And so in weaving, I think my mom has always talked about like weaving where we're from, where and in my family, and has I think has been almost like a mainstay in a lot of households across the archipelago. But I think when we think about neocolonialism and just even the more recent history of what it means to be Filipino within a national identity and all of that stuff, and there are certain practices that go beyond like the textiles, but like actually like weaving with like leaves. And so that's what my family has done. So mats, baskets. My grandma actually used to weave like smaller like ornaments that get sent to the US to sell for Christmas time. And so some of those practices, though, in comparison to textiles, I mean, like every time we would go home, and it's not that often, right? I'd ask around for people who still make these hats, buntal hats, or, um, even some of the mats in a certain way. Some of them get imported from different parts of the archipelago. And so really a part of that culture, um, is not really being seen. It's not as highlighted or as common. And so I think it started with that from my family, just having that kind of awareness. And so I have an appreciation for folks who are still trying to amplify and kind of keep those cultures alive by either working with weavers directly and trying to, kind of sell and um, uh, products or anything that's for, for other people to kind of consume and to have and right. And so giving more access to that way. So it just so happened that I got back on Instagram and I was like looking at, I always follow these different folks who are doing that kind of work and also in community. And so a lot of people who do cultural work, are on Instagram. And so somebody that I knew from somebody else, right, was who's been weaving for some time. She made a post and she was like, "Look, it's time for me to start teaching, and I'm opening up some spots. See if it might be a fit for you." And I was like, "Why not?" Right? And if they take me, they take me. And so they took me. And I was like really honest that this is not my culture, right? It's not something, but I think in as someone who's in diaspora and the responsibility of what that looks like and understanding just how important it is to be able to carry some of these stories on. If I can support with that, then I'm happy to support with that. And so in doing that and hearing about weaving that way, it's brought me back to my own. And so in such an interesting way, because like I was telling you, like we go home every so often and I really can't find some of these weavers. And they've come up in the last like couple months. And so I just actually got a shipment of books in from my auntie because I met like a local, I don't even want to, I mean, the title, I guess you could call them a local historian now, but found some of the folks who were still weaving puni, where there's a whole different story about that, which is what I'm trying to continue doing here. But I think I can whip out the book right now. I actually just have them right next to me. Yeah, they kind of captured these stories in this book, but even trying to get some of these books, sorry, oh wow, I'm a YouTuber now.
Okay, I see it a little bit. Okay.
There, kind
What
of.
the
Oh,
Philippines is that from?
what part?
Yeah. Like
From
part of the north.
Luzon, Northern Luzon. So this is from Bulacan, so Puni in Bulacan.
Okay.
And that's where my mom is from. And you know what's so interesting is my sister, she's Kanaka, and they were showing me like lauhala weaving, which this is like a really simple bracelet.
Oh,
Um, and so this is when she just gifted to me, but
your
there's
mom
more
made that?
complicated. No, my sister.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so she's Kanaka. She's Native Hawaiian, and so she was teaching me. So when I went to go visit her, we were actually harvesting some bark and whatnot to make cordage and all these things. And so she's telling me about, you know, the story of puhala or hala, the tree, and the leaves that they use, lau hala, is what they use to make baskets and so many different things, mats, everything. And you know, I was listening to all this. I totally got it. I was like, yes, awesome, beautiful, amazing. You know what I mean? Just like connecting with that. Cool. I don't know why it didn't occur to me that, hey, boo, it's the same thing as this. And like months later, and I was like, when I made the connection, right? I was like, I kind of sat there and I was like, oh, here I am, like, oh my gosh, cool, yay. And hello, and it's so funny. It's so funny, Mello, that like it's comically sad, but also hella funny because in Hawaii, and my cousins are also Chamorro, they're Chamorro and Filipino, right? And so Chamorro also have a really similar weaving style. And you would probably find that across like different islands and folks that have similar kind of climates as we do, and similar plants. So the plant that we use, right, either pandanus to weave or even different types of palm, right? They're just the same species, like, or they're cousins, they're literal cousins to each other. And I was like, why does this plant look so familiar? Like, you know, I'm like staring at this tree and I was like, it looks so familiar. And then like I look at like what, you know, I even have a basket up there from my grandma, and I'm like, it's behind me every single meeting. And I was like, I looked at what the plant actually looked like, and I was like, oh my God, it's the same plant. I was like, what in the what? And I was like, my ancestors are probably just like, girl. So that is what I mean, the disconnect or connection to land like literally is sometimes like when I can't even recognize that, when I am staring at it at, you know, on a different island, on my cousin's island, if you want to call it that way. And like no neurons were firing at that time. None. Nothing was popping off. And so it's so interesting how even across like the archipelago, this is a rare story. This should not be a rare story. And it just recently has been going through a little bit of a revival that I randomly and in terms of like data and stuff, like finding these stories aside from word of mouth and having to know people who can go in person to find that person at the school if they happen to be there, not on lunch, right? If they weren't sick that day, who has a friend of a friend whose auntie knows the person who made this book like 5 years ago and published it randomly, very locally, um, that it can somehow get into my hands in 2025, um, after the people who are a part of this have passed. And so it's part of those things. It's just yeah, collecting data in that way. And if I want to think about it that way, doing research in that way, has been so it's incredible, but it's challenging and but the types of connections that I make and the way that I get to process that. I mean, I even told you about this story with my sister telling me everything. Like this is like really ancestral knowledge, right? Ike kupuna, as they say. Um, and as much as I accepted that wholly and fully, and I was like, yeah, and it kind of got me, thinking about like, what about ours? And this whole time, Mello, the things that sit in my room with me every time I'm on Zoom or like somewhere down the hall or once I walk outside sometimes we have like similar plants and I'm just like what so it's incredible.
Wow, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's awesome that like when you were in Hawaii and you were seeing like, oh, this is so cool, and you saw all these other places and different people, and it's not until you actually went home when you're like, wait a second, you made
Yeah.
those connections, and so I think sometimes you don't make the connections until you literally make that return.
Right.
So
Yeah.
like, and I mean that in like the literal sense, but also the
Yeah.
um metaphorical sense, right?
Right.
That's literally what happened to you. Like
Yeah.
you went home after seeing all this stuff, and then wait a second, things that you didn't like think about before. Now you do. Or maybe you've thought about before, but you were so busy with the rat race
Mm-hmm.
living in American society, right? That you probably didn't have time to, just give a second thought to these things that like are around you. Maybe like, oh, we're like taking things for granted because it's in front of us.
Yeah.
But to actually like spend time connecting it's
Right.
a totally different practice. Um, because you were so busy. I mean, you
Yeah.
were busy doing research, working, teaching. So actually, I'm gonna like now ask you about that aspect in terms of like, how do you think uh, your cultural stewardship or anything really about like being Filipino or caring about our people, how has that like permeated to your professional life at all?
Oh gosh, in so many of the ways. And I think even and so thanks for that question because I mean, speaking of like coming ready and staying ready, and like, when you just shared about returning to, right? That's kind of like what it is. Like in this like other world, I guess that I could talk about that I also live in, right? Um, it didn't allow me to be present to be able to even come ready or even to be ready to I think even have some of these things or to be present for these things and accept that in a way that I think it deserves. And the same thing that it does in terms of return also, I think about land back, I think about being a settler here. And so in my weaving practice and thinking about being in diaspora and doing all of this, I also think about the people of this land on Turtle Island, the native folks here. And so a lot of that even it's connecting to the work that I do in science because a lot of how I see the world from these perspectives, right, really informs my science, informs my practice as an educator, and I think really informs what I think my responsibility is as somebody who is also of different lineages and indigenous lineages. And who is in diaspora. I didn't ask to be here, right? I don't think many of us did. But for circumstances, colonialism, all the things, colonization, I'm here. And I'm also actively contributing to, in so many ways, like the displacement and loss of culture. And I see that reflected in how I'm not even able to practice my own in some ways, right? I don't have like the materials, right? And that connection to the land for the things that I might need to do this, right? And so it allows me to think within this almost like in between space of like, how can we do that? And think about responsibility and return and repair, right? And create something new moving forward. And I think that's also the same thing in science and in education, because those are the same systems that almost repeat some of the same kinds of harm. And so when I think about my work and even doing my project, my research project with you, Mello, and my master's thesis, finding the language of how to talk about these things that I know and that I experience, right? But doing it in academic, terms. Um, and what is the responsibility then when academia also capitalizes on a lot of these knowledges? And so in my research, I want to make it clear that my point in talking about myself and talking about the stories of other people is really to highlight some of the inequity, right? And some of the harm and really solidify the stories of these folks, of Native folks, of Indigenous folks, of Black folks, the people who are most marginalized by these systems, and not to capitalize on their experiences to talk and center myself, but to really, because there's, I think, I mean, we have oral histories, right? We have oral story, how we pass those things down, and there's a different respect for that. And in academia and Western cultures, right, a lot of it is this written thing. And there's a different power in being able to write and have counter narratives. And so really thinking about how can I use like this way that I see the world and how I have come into this um, to continue to do that. And so that's in practice, in my research, in what I do in community within education, at the community college that I was doing just recently, running programs, and also teaching our local youth in like Richmond, San Pablo, and really coming from a place of who we are as a people and our identities and our histories, our stories, and using that to inform the way that we see. So we're not always having to respond, right, to the things that capitalism or whatever, white supremacy and all these things might want to throw at us, but really trying to reframe some of those pieces.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. That's really powerful. And actually, while you were talking about um, basically navigating these professional spaces, academic in particular, where it actually reminded me of when you were talking about the eskrima style where it was wavy, right? And
Yeah.
you're almost doing this calibration, like
Yes.
of how you navigate this different space. So even though you are talking about advocating for, this historically um, disenfranchised like populations or communities, um, you're also like making sure like, hey, am I actually also being a colonizer here?
Great. Yeah.
Because there is a privilege, because we have attained like a certain amount of education. That is
Right.
privilege.
Right.
And so you mentioned, um, well, you mentioned like also like Black folks, and that actually made me think about like Kimberly Crenshaw and intersectionality,
Yes.
really capturing this complexity of like you can be marginalized in one way, but like privileged in another way. Uh,
Totally.
and I think this is one of the things that you really have to like reflect on,
Mhm.
not just in one sitting, but this is like a continuous conversation and reflection on like individual level, but also on a communal level, community level. Um, but yeah, I think having you in the space, I think it's helping a lot of students and really a good way of having someone in the system advocating for you. I mean, if I feel like if you're making a change in one person's life, I think you have succeeded, and I'm sure you have like helped way more than one person in this journey. And yeah, I mean, and you're still, you're very much alive, right? And
Yeah, totally. All the ways.
totally.
She activated. She out here.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, I really appreciate you for dropping all this knowledge. Um, I guess we're gonna wrap it up and see, is there something you wanna tell anyone out there who is trying to find their way out of this rat race, uh,
Mhm.
or just trying to connect into something deeper, into like this ancestral wisdom that you kind of mentioned today.
Yeah, I think, I mean, maybe something that's just top of mind right now is, and people like I feel like misuse this all the time, but like rest is resistance. But really thinking and challenging our perceptions of time. And like decolonizing in that way, like our perception of time and like the things that we need to do on this 24-hour clock. Like my family has this story about like when I asked them, I used to be so frustrated by these things, a lot of cultural things, because I was like, it's so slow. Like, when are we gonna be done? Like, when are why do we have to do this and do that? They're like, it'll be ready when it's ready. So take the time that you need and really thinking about rest. And I feel like there's something so important about like reclaiming and taking back like your time, and taking back what the way that we should be able to like wake up with a little bit more ease, right? And unfortunately that's not the thing. And so something that in making this pivot and taking it some time away from education and academia, it is a completely different shift. And I think the biggest thing that stood out to me is the time. Aside from like energy and all the things that get put into that, but how are they taking my time? And how does that allow me or not allow me to reclaim like all of this and like being able to do this? Because it shouldn't even be that challenging for me to continue to do my work in that way. But right, the system has challenged me in all of that. But being able to move with some ease, even just for a little bit, has been so great. And so, um, reclaim your time if you can.
Thank you for that. And
Yes.
I'm definitely gonna, try to follow that as well.
It's hard. It is so, so hard. So
Especially when
really,
when you're like used to go, go, go. Um, and you're trying to like, I'm trying to get my master's, I'm trying to graduate, I'm trying to, get a job, blah, 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 all these pressures. Um, and usually like sometimes it's like the weekend, I'm like, I have 48 hours.
right,
When am I gonna get to do all these things? And I'm like, I don't have time to do this.
right,
And but just being able to uh think about time differently, like how you're talking about it. It sounds like a privilege, but maybe it doesn't have to be. Maybe it
not
could
all the
be
time.
like a daily practice or something.
Right.
Um, well, thank you again, Eleanor.
Thank you, Hello.
Yeah, I really enjoyed talking to you, and I hope to see you soon.
Yes, I always love getting to yap. So love yapping with you.
Okay, see ya.
Bye, Mello. Ingat.